Hello everyone and welcome to another news roundup for Final Fantasy XVI, this one brought to you by a series of interviews that were just released on IGN.com, PlayStation Blog, and Dengeki and Famitsu. These interviews were conducted with the game's director Hiroshi Takai, localization director Michael Christopher Koji Fox, and creative director Kazutoyo Maihiro, with producer Naoki Yoshida also weighing in. These interviews confirmed a few things we already suspected, while revealing totally new information about characters, icons, dominance, the battle system, and the continent of Valisthea. So let's get right into it. By the way, if you like this video, please give it a like and this channel a follow, and I'll be sure to keep bringing you more Final Fantasy goodness. So first, according to the Famitsu interview that was just released, the development team has revealed that Final Fantasy XVI is 95% complete, and that they hope to announce the official release date by the end of this year, as well as a new trailer. By the way, Yoshi P also revealed to Dengeki that a demo is planned. Next, we got to learn more about icons and dominates and what part they play in the story. Kazutoyo Maihiro explains in his IGN interview with Kat Bailey that the main focus of the story is indeed on icons. Now, because the team made the decision to focus on icons, they decided to dial back the number of icons in the game so that the story could better focus on the relationship between icons and their dominates. Quote, "Unlike the summons of other installments in the series, there aren't too many icons, nor are there any hidden surprise icons. Not including any hidden icons or having a huge number of them means we can explore each icon and their dominant more thoroughly." So what about the icons we saw on the mural during the last Final Fantasy XVI trailer? Will they at least be in the game? Not necessarily. According to the creative director, that mural was painted, quote, eons ago, and although the icons that appear in the mural existed at some point historically, whether or not they'll appear in the game remains a secret. However, as one person in my previous video pointed out, we know that we've seen 8 icons so far, not counting the dark icon Ifrit, and that it's possible each icon has a dark icon counterpart. Could Ifrit be Phoenix's counterpart? Thus bringing the total to 16, which matches the number of the game's entry in the series. Just saying. But what about dominates? Are dominates truly dominant, and can they do whatever they want with their crazy icon powers? Well, according to an interview found on the PlayStation blog, no. Quote, "You might think that the dominates should be able to do whatever they want with the immense power of the icons, but using this power comes with the drawback of petrifying the dominate's body. This gives rise to turmoil faced by dominates who cannot act as they wish, as well as shaping the relationships they have with their aligned countries and the people surrounding them." So what happens when a dominant becomes completely petrified? Does another dominant immediately replace them? According to creative director Kazutoyo Maihiro in the Famitsu interview, it depends. Some dominates are born hundreds of years after the previous dominant of a specific icon becomes petrified, but other dominates are born soon after their predecessor becomes petrified. Maihiro confirms that there is an in-game rule where there can only be one dominant for each icon at any given time. And yes, there have been times in Valisthea's history where there were no dominates. But this particular time period in Final Fantasy XVI happens to have a lot of them, which according to Maihiro is rather miraculous. Interestingly enough, it's confirmed that although you can only have one dominant for every icon, you can have more than one dominant in the same country. The development team confirmed in different interviews that the Kingdom of Walud has 2 dominates, Garuda and Odin's dominates, and that Shiva and Ramuh's dominates, along with Bahamut, are a part of the Sanbreque Empire, although I have my doubts that the former are all that willing, since Jill is one of them for sure, and we know she was probably captured by Sanbreque after their invasion of Rosaria. By the way, this is new. Besides dominants, there are also people called bearers in Valisthea, who can use the ether contained in the world to cast magic without using crystals. According to the Dengeki interview, like the dominates, their bodies will become petrified if they continue to use magic. Now, it depends on the country they're in, but in many places, these bearers are really disliked. Man, it seems like nothing is going well for the people of Valisthea. Even the continent is a mess. The development team confirms that the world is indeed turning into a giant wasteland of sorts due to the depletion of ether from the mother crystals, likely a direct result of people extracting and consuming ether the way we extract and consume oil in real life. This depletion of ether is apparently causing the world to resemble not a desert, but rather a moon, where there's absolutely nothing. No plants, no animals, although there is still oxygen, apparently. In any case, once an area becomes blighted, it cannot return to its current state, which is why people are flocking to mother crystals and going to war. They're fighting over resources. The team also confirmed that Final Fantasy XVI is going to be a lot more mature and realistic this time around, but although you'll see echoes of Game of Thrones or other types of media in the game, the story is very much its own thing. In fact, according to the localization director, Michael Christopher Koji Fox during the IGN interview, Final Fantasy XVI isn't a story about political intrigue. It's a story about Clive. And while politics play a part in the things happening around Clive, he's not at the center of all of that, but rather at the mercy of larger forces. A prisoner of fate who has decided it's time to break out. What could that mean? Kazuyo Maehiro goes on to describe Clive as, quote, a character with a somewhat dark atmosphere, having sworn revenge. Interesting. By the way, in the PlayStation blog interview, we learn about two entirely new characters. Takai states, quote, he hasn't been announced yet, but I like the character of Byron, who appears partway through the story. He's a character with an extremely likable personality, very cheerful and magnanimous, so I expect a lot of players will end up liking him just as I do. Unfortunately, I can't get into too much detail since it'll enter spoiler territory, but the scene where he first appears makes me really emotional. I imagine he'll be announced in future promotional material, so when you see him in the game, think back to this interview. We will. In the same interview, Koji Fox adds that one of his favorite characters in the game is a bard who sings of Clive's exploits. Originally, this NPC was simply supposed to recite vague poems depending on where Clive happened to be in the main scenario, but they thought it would be fun to have him sing the lines in true spoony bard fashion. You'll never actually get to speak to this person as the player, but apparently the music that will accompany this bard is going to be epic. At least it sounds like it. Meanwhile, in the IGN interview, the creative director sheds light on two other newly introduced characters from the last trailer. Quote, Dion Lesage is a character who was created as a reflection of Kynes, made in the traditional image of a prince. He's an all-around Superman, with an icon's power, good looks, and skilled in both the martial and intellectual arts. Having said that, not everything in his past and his upbringing is always as gilded as it seems, so he's quite a compelling character. On the other hand, Barnabas Thalmer was conceptualized in the image of a king cloaked entirely in mystery. Looking at past installments, they absolutely embody the Dragoon and Dark Knight archetypes. So like Kain and Cecil from Final Fantasy IV? Man, I love that game. Oh, and it was confirmed in the Dengeki interview that Sombrek and its political structure should remind people of Final Fantasy XIV's Ishgard. Yes! Which makes me think that maybe Dion is inspired by either Sir Estinian or Sir Emmerich, or both. He's handsome, powerful, and kind to the people. On that note, however, fans may be disappointed to learn that there probably aren't going to be any Elysian, Viera, or any other unique races in Final Fantasy XVI. In fact, producer Naoki Yoshida admits that due to the game taking place in a medieval European setting and wanting to avoid accidental controversy by assigning distinct ethnicities to antagonists or protagonists, the team decided not to go down an overly diverse path. According to Yoshi P, quote, in the end, we simply want the focus to be less on the outward appearance of our characters and more on who they are as people. People who are complex and diverse in their natures, backgrounds, beliefs, personalities, and motivations. On the bright side, Moogles and Chocobos will be making an appearance alongside familiar monsters like Bombs and Morballs, and the team promises some nice Easter eggs that should make fans smile. As for the narrative itself, the main story moves forward without any branching points. However, there are lots of side stories interspersed around the main story that, quote, give a lot of insight into the lore and show different sides of the characters. Meanwhile, the world is full of areas of varying sizes, some smaller and some larger, but there are multiple so-called field areas containing settlements and other features within them. By the way, in each area, the developer has included places to gather resources, search for strong enemies called elite marks, and include situations that, quote, Clive will need to overcome whilst the power he's obtained from the icons are restricted. Thus, Final Fantasy XVI is, quote, not a game that you can finish in its entirety by only following the main story. However, although you can walk around freely in field areas, you don't have to explore every inch of them to progress the story. This is not a huge open-world game like Final Fantasy XIV. In fact, according to the Famitsu interview, everywhere you go in the story, you go there for a purpose. And although there are things like capital cities in each area, they're not necessarily always places you can just walk around in. At least, that's how I interpreted it. As for battles that take place in the game, according to the Famitsu interview, there will be two types of terrain you can fight in. A dedicated stage that matches the battle situation Clive finds himself in, and vast fields where players can move freely. Interestingly enough, icon fights will control differently from normal battles, and since MP management isn't a thing, you can more freely try out different combinations of abilities fairly early on. Also, according to the Dengeki interview, Final Fantasy V was a bit of an inspiration when it comes to combat. There's no traditional job class system per se, but there's apparently a similarity in the way you can customize abilities. According to Maihiro, quote, ultimately you can learn all of the abilities in Final Fantasy V, but in the process, you prioritize the jobs you raise, customize your abilities, and solidify your character's role. The team pondered what it would be like to take that concept and put it into a more action-based game with abilities tied to icons and not just jobs, which allows the player to come up with their own unique combination of actions while playing. That's cool, and what's more, elemental attributes won't affect battles. You don't have to worry about things like, oh no, ice is invalid because I'm facing an ice enemy. Also, good news, Clive won't be fighting alone. The team confirmed that there will be AI companions who accompany Clive on his journey, and that Clive will always have a buddy named Torgo by his side that can be controlled by the computer or limited manual commands like attack and recover. Is that the doggy? I guess we'll have to wait and see. Also, if combat is a little too challenging, there are two modes to choose from when playing. Action mode, which is somewhat standard, and story focus mode, which lowers enemy durability and attack frequency and gives you immediate access to support accessories that allow you to more easily perform combos and dodges. The reason there are two modes is that the developer wanted the game to be accessible to everyone, but the team mentions that the only real difference between the two modes comes down to the presence or absence of support accessories. Woo! And those are just some of the highlights from these newly released interviews. To read each of these interviews, head on over to IGN.com, PlayStation Blog, Dengeki, and Famitsu. I apologize, by the way, if I didn't quite translate the interviews in Dengeki and Famitsu quite right. Please be sure to add any new information or corrections in the comments below. I appreciate it. So, what do you think of these developments? Are you disappointed we won't have a bonanza of icons? Does this mean no Knights of the Round? Are you excited because the story is going to be far more mature than previous installments? What do you think of the new characters, the new details about the battle system, the world? Let me know in the comments section below. Thanks so much for watching, guys. See you later.